Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. So today I'm here to talk about books numbers 86 through 90 of the books that I'm reading in 2023. I've decided to space out my wrap-ups in like groups of 5 because I can get really chatty when I talk about the books that I have read. Let's get right to it. Book number 86 of the books that I have read is Poverty by America. This is written by Matthew Desmond. This is a book that I saw recommended in several different places, and I chose to read it with my husband. We were looking for a book to buddy read together, so we purchased the audiobook and read it on a couple of long drives we had to do during that time. And it is really actually a fantastic book. A lot of the information on here was not necessarily new to me because Desmond uses a lot of history to talk about how poverty has been built in this country, especially racial poverty. And so he does not ignore the elements of race, sex, and class when talking about how poverty has been created and how expensive it is to be poor and how dependent on poverty a lot of the people who make wealth in this country have been. So a lot of that, those elements were not new to me, though there were a few things here and there that were new to me. Everything is really well sourced, and I found the information to just be really, really spot on. Not everybody might agree with his analysis of it or his take on it, because he is asking people to consider that there are things we can do to alleviate poverty in this country, and it will require some sacrifices from people. It means we're not always ordering for goods from the typical places where we get them from, online or in person. It means, doing the extra work to find companies that are paying their workers ethically, that are making things ethically, and that is work, and it requires some sacrifice. It also requires rethinking the kind of social services and the way we think about the social services we offer in this country. And that, I think, is one of the biggest reasons why I would recommend this book. It's really easy, for example, in our neighborhoods and our communities to talk about the problem of homelessness, the problem of free lunches, these things like that, and to think of people as moochers and or as not being deserving enough. And I think he doesn't really challenges those ideas in this book. And it's really, really important that we think about these things and the way that we have been trained to think about social services and helping people as mooching, and that it is unethical when we conduct ourselves in our community in a way that stigmatizes helping others, and that we have the resources and the means to end poverty in this country, in the United States and all over the world, and that we're not doing it because of the way certain ideas have been sold to us by politicians and by the culture that we live in. For that, I found this book just incredibly important. Next book on my list, it was The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enriquez. This was a reread I did of this short story, horror short stories by, and Mariana Enriquez is Argentinian, and I read it with one of my good friends. Now, to me, this particular collection is not as strong as her other collection. She has an earlier collection of horror short stories called The Things We Lost in the Fire, and I think that Things We Lost in the Fire is a stronger collection than The Dangers of Smoking in Bed. However, a lot of these stories continue with very similar themes, a lot of social horror, so you don't find necessarily a lot of scares, a lot of body horror. Things like that are very rare in her stories. Instead, you find like little stories of like people doing things or thinking about things, doing some small moments in their lives that can be horrific. I'll leave it at that. It's a great way if you're looking for Latina horror writers to read that are new to you. I think short story collections can be a great way to kind of get a taste of writers like Mariana Enriquez, although I would recommend more Things We Lost in the Fire than The Dangers of Smoking in Bed. Book number 88 is Done and Done by Leonor Soliz. I recently did a video spotlighting Leonor Soliz in which I talked about this book. So I'll just give you a quick summary here. Done and Done is a story of, it's a romance novel, and you have the heroine who is moving to LA to take a job at a nonprofit that her best friend started. Her best friend married a movie star. They have a lot of money, and she's a documentarian, the best friend. So our heroine is here to help them run this company, and it turns out that they want to hire the best friend's husband's brother to also help run this company, and the two of them have chemistry, but our hero is somebody who does not realize he's dealing with a lot of depression. He is heavily depressed and has been for years. And finally enough, people have told him, hey, I think you're depressed, that he is seeking help. I loved that element in here, and the hero goes and seeks professional help. He gets into therapy and he works on his issues, and it has nothing to do with the heroine, but as he's working through his issues, it also helps open him up to the possibility of a relationship with this woman that he clearly has amazing chemistry with, and that there's feelings there for each other. So it is a grumpy sunshine story. So she is very the opposite of him. She is very sunshiny, sure of herself. She is plus size, and the plus size representation in here I thought was really good, because it's never an issue, it's never a thing in the story, it's just there. Like, it is a part of who our heroine is, but she is very confident in who she is, and it's never kind of something where we don't see her be confident about her body and her abilities as a person. There's a lot of like competence porn here. She's an extremely competent, put together, amazing professional, and amazing friend. I loved all those aspects of that in here. Our heroine is Latina as well, so this is a known voices Latina romance novel, which is fantastic. And Leonor Soliz is one of my favorite authors after finishing reading her three novels. So I very much recommend Done and Done. Book number 89 of the books I'm reading in 2023 was My Fourth Time We Drowned, Seeking Refuge in the World's Deadliest Migration Route by Sally Hayden. I saw several people review this as part of the Book 2 prize reading they were doing, and I immediately knew that I needed to read this. Cousin in particular, I saw reading this, and who else did I see? I don't remember who else I saw, but it's about migrants that are trying to make their way to Europe via the Mediterranean, and how deadly of a route that is. It is one of the migration routes that has the most deaths, and it's really horrific. Hayden has been following the story of a lot of these migration patterns for a long time, and I learned a lot. I already knew some of these immigration issues because I'm a historian, and my degree is actually in European history and French history in particular. And so I've read a lot of that history about immigration, especially to France, and the conflicts that arise within French society and culture, because migrants are coming from different places in the world with different religions, different language, different skin color. And the way that Sally Hayden talks about here, I found to be really important and really powerful. It also allowed me to make a lot of connections between the immigration policies that are currently happening in the Mediterranean versus the immigration policies that the U.S. is implementing in Latin America and in the Mexico-U.S. border in particular. It's really horrific in both places. And in both places, what you see is Western countries trying to force economically developing countries to implement their immigration policies, right? Like in the Mediterranean, it's European countries forcing North African countries to police the Mediterranean and to basically hold immigrants in North Africa and prevent them from coming into Europe. This is the exact same thing that the U.S. is doing in Mexico. Right? They are holding Mexicans in Mexico, forcing the Mexican government to deal with them there so that they don't enter the U.S. This is an oversimplification of some of these dynamics, but it is a true like this is basically what is happening there. And in this story, this book was really hard to read. It's really hard to read. Hayden was in contact through smuggled phones with people that were being held in detention facilities, and really calling these places detention facilities is extremely generous. These are like prisons where migrants are being held in places like Libya, for example. And it's horrific because some of these countries are experiencing civil warfare, and at the same time that migrants are getting stuck there, and they're not their final destination. These migrants are not trying to stay in these countries, they're trying to make it to Europe, and they're being held there in extremely horrific situations. And while the UN and European countries are saying they're doing much, they're mostly turning a blind eye. And they can do that when the rest of the world's not paying attention. And there are moments in which the European public and the rest of the world pays attention, and that helps alleviate some of the pressure. But mostly people are not paying attention, and it allows for abuses to continue to happen. And that is why I think books like this is really important, to shed light on those situations. And because really public attention and global attention to it can really make a difference. So I encourage everybody to pick up this book. There are places where Sally Hayden, as a journalist, I think has to adhere to certain ethical standards of what a journalist can and cannot do, and it's heartbreaking. She also, I feel like, writes about those ethical, moral dilemmas in a way that is really fantastic. She is a white European woman, and so she realizes that she is telling these stories and that these are not her stories to tell. And so she has done work in helping migrants tell their own stories. So here she is approaching it from a journalistic perspective, not as somebody who's kind of co-opting these stories for her own personal gain, while at the same time she understands that she's still kind of taking these stories to some extent and kind of gaining something from telling some of those stories. But I think that approaching it in this way, where you're being very transparent about the ethical choices that you're making and why you're making the choices that you're making, I think is the best way to approach these topics when you're writing about stories that are not your own. However, as a journalist, I think she has a lot of credibility in what she's doing, and the fact that migrants have trusted her with their stories it's a lot. It I think weighs heavily in favor of why I would recommend a book like this. And then finally, book number 90. In the books that I've been reading, I had to include romances. I was reading my fourth time read round because it's a very, very heavy book. So book number 90 is You Never Forget Your First by Millie Perez. Millie Perez is a self-published Latina author who is writing romance novels. This book is a book in which our heroine is reconnects with somebody that she's always had a crush on, but has always been out of her reach. This man has been part of her circle of friends for forever, and they have a really tight group of friends, but he is very wealthy. He's the wealthiest in the group, and so he's always been kind of remained at a distance from her, and he has purposely kept his distance from her, and she feels like she is constantly being judged by him, but it turns out he's been keeping his distance because he's had a crush on her this entire time as well, and he's trying to like not interfere in her life because, you know, he understands that she has like other things going on, and he wants to be really careful, friend group dynamics, etc., etc. And then this is a romance novel, so obviously they're going to be thrown together quite a bit. So the first half of the novel, I think, is really this interesting dynamic between these two friends and figuring out how that can maybe make some relationship work here. And then the last maybe third of the book becomes way more thrillerish. There's like a threat that comes into the story, and a kidnapping that occurs, police sirens, violence, like all this stuff. And that shift from like a contemporary romantic comedy into a bit of a thriller was a bit odd. If you don't know that that is coming, it feels like it comes out of nowhere, even though there are hints here and there that it's coming. You start getting the hints and you're like, wait a minute, isn't this a contemporary romance? And yeah, it's a contemporary romance, a rom-com with a thriller element at the end. I didn't think the novel needed that thriller element. I think sometimes writers get caught like trying to put too much plot into their books, when I think quiet romance novels that are about people interacting, about their personalities, about the smaller things in life are really, really fantastic. But so if this had been either just a rom-com, I think it would have been fantastic. If this had been just a like thriller romance, it would have worked fantastic. But I do feel like these were two separate books here. At the same time, I was really into it. Maybe because I was doing such a heavy reading along with it, that I was sucked into the book. I got sucked into the rom-com elements. I got sucked into the thriller elements. So I can't say that ultimately it didn't work for me. Ultimately, it kind of worked, even though I do think there what we really had here was two separate books. But I enjoyed it, and I got to meet Millie Perez at Steamy Lit Con, which was really fantastic, and she was great. I pre-ordered her books, and like I went up to her booth, and like I was like, "Hi, I'm Cynthia," and she was like, "Oh, you're Cynthia," and like that was really cool, because she had seen that I guess the names of the people who had pre-ordered and stuff, and she was really, really warm and friendly to me, and her husband was really great. He took pictures of us together, so I'm like, meeting her was really, really fantastic. So that probably even post reading it heightened like the my feelings for this book. But I was also, just as I was reading it, like fully sucked in, like invested in this story and its twists and turns. But if you don't like some of those aspects, then you know might not be the book for you. But it might also be worth giving it a chance if you're somebody that wants a story that's kind of really immersive, especially if you're reading some like heavier things at the time. I've become a huge fan of like reading nonfiction, heavy nonfiction, along with reading either romance novels or like cozy mysteries or thrillers, which are lighter reading. Even when it's a thriller, to me it's still lighter reading than reading nonfiction that is, you know, really heavy. So those are books number 86 through 90 of the books that I am reading in 2023. If you've read any of these, if they interest you at all, let me know down below. If you have other recommendations for books like The Fourth Time We Drowned, leave them down in the comment sections as well. This is a topic that, like I said, I've read a lot of the history of it, but because of my personal history, I sometimes stay away from reading some of these heavier immigration stories. But if anybody has recommendations, I will add them to my TBR. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.